4 young men in search of a hiding place in forests of the high Sierras. In the back of their truck, the body of a teenager. According to later court testimony, 2 of the young men in the forest that night had had sexual relations with their victim. All hell had broken loose at a party when someone blurted out that their girl, the girl everyone knew as Gwen, was transsexual. In their eyes, a boy faking it as a girl. With one of her former lovers screaming out, "I can't be gay, I can't be gay," Gwen was kneed, punched, beaten over the head with an iron skillet, and finally strangled with a rope. They dumped Gwen's body in a shallow grave and crushed it down with rocks.
Her face was caved in. You couldn't even tell that this was my child anymore. The bruises are just, it's horrible, horrible. I mean, you could tell that she had been beaten. During her transitioning, this was my biggest fear. That she would be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and someone would discover that she wasn't a she and would have male anatomy and kill her. Hate kills, and it killed my daughter.
We have a lot of farmers, hardworking people that have always grown up that a boy's a boy and a girl's a girl, and it's also a strong religious belief that Noah shouldn't be like that because God didn't make him that way. It's hard to make people understand.
I like to make stuff out of ribbons and stuff, like shirts and skirts and stuff like that.
I know it's nothing that we've done. Noah has been that way since he's been old enough to express himself. We've done many things to try to steer Noah away from the way he is now. Nothing's been encouraging. I think with a child like Noah, if you accept him unconditionally, you're teaching him love. You're teaching him that his parents love him and they support him no matter if he's different than the other boys. And I do know one thing, he didn't choose to be like this.
You put it like this, put it in the back, then you twist it in the back, pull on it like that, put it up here and tie it.
Were you worried about this?
Yeah, I was very worried about Noah. I didn't want him growing up, being liking girl stuff or whatever, thinking he was a girl. Nobody wants their son to grow up like that.
Then you gotta keep on wrapping it around until there's nothing left of it. And then you've gotta tuck it in so it stays. Then you have a skirt.
It would be very much relief if Noah, when his hormones kicked in, that he just started acting like the rest of the boys. It would be a relief to me because I know the main thing, his life would be a heck of a lot easier.
Not usually. Usually they're just asking me questions.
Like what?
Like, are those girl shoes, or are you wearing girl shoes? And they just ask me questions like that, like about my clothing and stuff.
When you start being called a lesbian, homo, fag, when you get called a he, she, the question I think that bothers them the most now is, are you a boy or a girl?
I would just like to tell people that I don't feel like answering all those questions, so don't ask me.
What are your greatest fears?
Just that someone will hurt him. I've read it more than once, that there's about a 50% chance that these children will be killed or kill themselves. That would be my biggest concern.
The violence against our community of transgender women tends to be really just over the top and angry and horrible. Usually a transgender woman is not just punched or beaten up or even just murdered with a gunshot. There are transgender women who are shot with machine guns until they're just pieces of meat, until they're unrecognizable. There are women who are stabbed 30, 40, 50 times and then set on fire. If you can just imagine physically the time it would take to stab someone 40 times. In 1999, I met a soldier named Barry who was able to see me as the woman I am and who loved me for the person that I am. At a certain point, his fellow soldiers discovered that the girlfriend that he talked about so much was a transsexual. You know, they discovered that I was transsexual. This all culminated in his murder on July 4th in 1999. They beat him to death with a baseball bat in his sleep.
People always assume that this is all about sex. And certainly we are all sexual beings in some way or another, but that's not the entire story. People transition for a lot of reasons. One of the confusing things in my own case for some people is that I'm attracted to women, and so they think, oh, you know, why would you do all this if you were attracted to women? And I think it really points out that this isn't about who you want to be with, it's about who you are. People want to have this nice, simple, black and white, binary world where everything's easily compartmentalized. But there's always going to be people who challenge those categories, and that's what we do with gender and sex and sexuality.
One person in 100 has a body that differs from what doctors consider standard male or female. That's over 4,000 people in a city this size.
When I was born, doctors couldn't determine if I was a boy or a girl. I had what are described as ambiguous genitalia. My parents were confused, scared. They weren't able to tell anyone who knew they'd had a child if it was a boy or a girl.
The challenge of people who used to be called hermaphroditic, what we now call have intersex conditions, is that they really do threaten the idea that there's this clear natural boundary between the male and the female, because there isn't a clear natural boundary. So intersex begins to raise for us the question of what gender really means and to what extent it really matters, and that's very uncomfortable.
And until very recently, the medical establishment was determined that there should be no ambiguity.
The finding of ambiguous genitalia in the newborn is a medical and social emergency. When the cause is established and gender assignment is made, the abnormal genitalia must be corrected.
Max was just a year old when his phallus was surgically reduced. He was brought up as a girl, Judy, who underwent a whole series of operations until the age of 15, never once being told what they were for.
For 20-odd years, I was not allowed to talk to anyone about this and didn't tell, just like my mother didn't tell her best friend. I never even told my best friend.
By her late teens, Judy felt confused. She tried a relationship with a boy and a girl.
Whereas my male partner, boyfriend, had not commented on the differences in my genital anatomy, which incidentally I wasn't even aware of at the time. My female partner did. She said something. She said, "Boy, Jude, you sure are weird." I came away from that thinking of myself as a monster or a freak. And so I decided that I would avoid that upset by being with men. So I quite literally settled down with the next guy to come along.
Judy simply married a male friend from college, but the relationship was short-lived. Judy had met Tamara.
I was really excited. It was definitely a case of love at first sight. Sparks just flew. It was magic.
I looked at her and fell in love with her. It was love at first sight. She was breathtakingly beautiful.
Then a bombshell hit.
I needed my childhood immunization records. So I contacted my childhood pediatrician and found out he had retired, and the woman who had taken over his practice had someone photocopy my records and mail them. And I opened my mail in a diner in Center City, Philadelphia, and right after my name, which at the time was Judy Elizabeth Beck, were the words male pseudohermaphrodite. And I was devastated and dumbfounded. At the same time, it was almost a relief because I had a label. Not only did I know that I was a monster, but I could tell you, I could point in the textbook exactly what kind of monster I was.
We started corresponding and just had this flurry of letters and gradually just started little bitty disclosures and, you know, boy, when I first met you, you really turned my head, and I would write something back, and, you know, we eventually just called it peeling the onion because it was just little tiny layer after little tiny layer to get to the heart of it.
I think it was a Friday evening. We talked on the phone and talked right through dawn. And at some point during the night, I told her.
I just remember being so sad that she thought that this was going to make such a big difference in the way that I felt about her. And that she hadn't had anybody to help carry the weight of that her whole life. That she'd gone through essentially 20-something years thinking that if anyone knew this, they would just not want to be with her. And I said, you know, that doesn't make any difference to me whatsoever.
The couple lived an open lesbian relationship, but Judy's knowledge of her own medical history was gnawing at her.
I began to question how valid the lesbian identity was. If I'm not female, can I be a lesbian? And thinking in those vicious circles and undermining this precious shred of identity that I had finally obtained threw me into a very bad depression. I was hospitalized.
What emerged from this turmoil was a man. Judy became Max. The full transition took 4 years, and incredibly, the loving bond with Tamara survived. They live as man and wife with a child conceived by Tamara.
At first I was resistant. I was like, no, you know, I finally got this lesbian relationship thing lined up. You know, I've got a community and I know who I am and I understand the terms of my relationship, and you can't go changing it on me in the middle. But on the other hand, I had a partner that I loved desperately who was miserable most of the time and uncomfortable in himself and uncomfortable in the world. He's a much more balanced, doing okay psychologically guy. And I guess I sort of chalk that up as a fair bargain.
This old man.
I don't have a male identity, and I don't know that I ever had a female identity, but I certainly don't have one now. And if pressed, I suppose I would say I have intersexed identity. I think of myself as intersexed, and I think I have a great deal more compassion than I ever did for men. I was at one point in my life a man-hating, separatist dyke.
Goofy's wife ran into the house. There was Goofy.
We've been together more than 10 years now, and we're still together. This is the same person that I fell in love with.
The hat on his head.
We all change over time. You get married at 19. By the time you're 69, you're not that girl of 19. Your body will change, you'll thicken in some places, maybe you'll lose weight. What we've had is just a more quick, condensed, radical transformation in one of us. And yes, his body has changed. It's going to keep on changing. You know, over the next 50 years, his hair's going to fall out and he's going to get wrinkles and he's still going to be my Max.
found in the brains of male to female transsexuals a female structure, and in the brain of female to male a male structure. So this explains that the brains of these transsexuals have not developed in agreement with their genitalia. They have all the characteristics of one sex, genetics, gonads, genitalia, hormones, but the brain has not followed that track.
Nada Kumar was then 22 years old and about to take the radical step that would separate him from ordinary society. For thousands of years, this procedure was carried out by untrained Hijra midwives. Fatalities were high. The operation is now illegal in India, but there are clinics willing to perform any service at a price. Nada had been saving for this moment since he was 15 years old. The Hijras call the operation a nirvan, meaning a rebirth. According to Hijra tradition, the sacrifice of the male genitalia induces feminine powers, the creative powers. "35-year-old Uma, his mother and teacher to them all. What are Nandini's feelings now as she looks back on that operation?
It feels good. Before, no matter how much makeup I used or what I wore, I always knew I had that male thing underneath. Now there are no more problems, but then when I used to have a bath, it was all female up to here, and when I looked down and saw that male thing, I would just sit there and cry. Now I am fully a woman."
Nandini began describing the journey that eventually led her here. How as a small child she would sneak away to her room and put on her sister's clothes and makeup.
When my parents found out, they would strip me naked. Is this a male thing or a female thing? They'd beat me. My mother, my father, and my brothers. So much. When I was 15, I told them everything. I said I wanted to become a Hijra. They ordered me out of the house saying, "Never come back, because it will ruin our reputation." I phoned them lots of times, but they won't take my calls.
I don't think I belong to any category. I'm not fully a woman or fully a man. I'm just a normal human being, facing the daily struggle of life.
I never think about which sex I am. Why do people need these labels? Homo, hetero, katoi. If being attracted to men makes me a woman, then in that sense I am a woman. But that doesn't tell you who I really am.
Call us whatever you want, but know that in our emotions and feelings, we're no different from anyone else. I've had everything done, and the full operation.
From top to toe. I've had my nose remodeled, my jawline softened, my teeth straightened, chin and Adam's apple both reduced, breast implants, and the complete sex change.
I've kept my penis. It's an important part of who I am, and I'm scared that the surgery may have side effects.
I've had nothing done. No hormones, no surgery. I believe the qualities of a woman or a man can only come from within.
I've had silicone injections in the forehead, the cheeks, the chin, the nose.
I remember my first day in kindergarten, when I just curtsied to greet the teacher. Then, when I went back home, I would take a towel, pleat it, and wear it as a skirt. I used to use my mother's lipstick. I knew, even at that age, that I wasn't a boy.
If sexual diversity is natural, how can it be threatening? Why does it incite such hatred?
That induces extreme violence to the point of killing someone, against people who are transgender or who are gay. The source of that violence, not always, but very often, comes from adolescent males, and often ones who are the least secure about their own sexualities.
People who are comfortable with their own sexuality are not threatened by people of a distinct orientation or distinct practices. Why should you be threatened?
Are there no moral lines at all?
I think there are. Don't hurt other people. Don't do things that other people don't want you to do. Don't judge people, lest you be judged.
Forbidding these different points of view or these different existences in the world doesn't control them either. It just drives them underground.
Can't we respect diversity? Because it exists all over the place. We have to respect it because it's nature.